Hold on, just one moment, please, ma'am.
Is there a problem, officer?
I'm afraid I can't find your reservation. Please give me just one more moment. I'm trying to locate your reservation here, but it seems to not be popping up in our system.
Is there some kind of problem with my booking?
Let me just check with my manager.
I'm sorry, but we have no record of that reservation.
I have the confirmation right here.
Well, that may be, but I cannot help you.
The valet's hand shot up like a stop sign before her car door had even fully opened. "This entrance is for guests only," he said, not bothering to look at her twice, his eyes already sliding past her toward the black sedan pulling in behind. Judge Vivian Ashworth stood there in the golden light spilling from the Kensington Grand Hotel, still wearing the navy blazer she'd had on since 7 that morning, her small overnight bag gripped in one hand, and for one long, humiliating moment, she said nothing at all. She had a reservation. She had a confirmation number. She had, until 60 seconds ago, believed that 30 years of building a life meant something walked with her wherever she went. But standing there under the marble archway, watched by a doorman who wouldn't meet her eyes and a manager already striding over with a tight, practiced smile, she understood with sudden clarity that none of it had followed her through those revolving doors. If you believe people deserve a second look before they're judged, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe to Wisdom Story House, because what happens next in this story is going to stay with you. Vivian Ashworth had flown in from the capital that afternoon for a legal symposium, exhausted from a case that had kept her in chambers past midnight for a week straight. She'd booked the Kensington Grand months in advance, a small reward to herself for making it through a brutal docket, the kind of quiet luxury she rarely allowed herself to enjoy. She'd pictured a hot bath, room service, maybe an hour of silence before the conference began in the morning. Instead she found herself standing at the check-in desk while a young clerk named Preston looked at her overnight bag, looked at her, and asked, with a kind of practiced doubt she'd heard her whole life in different uniforms and different rooms, whether she was quite sure she had the right hotel. She gave her name again. She gave her confirmation number again, slower this time, the way you might explain something to a child who hadn't been listening. Preston typed, frowned, typed again, and then excused himself to fetch his manager, a stiff, silver-haired man named Holloway who arrived already sighing, as though her presence in his lobby were an inconvenience he had budgeted no patience for. Holloway informed her, in the hushed and confidential tone hotel staff use when they think they are being discreet, that there seemed to be some irregularity with her booking, that perhaps she was thinking of a different property, that perhaps it would be more comfortable for her to try somewhere else nearby. He said the word comfortable in a way that made it very clear who he believed was uncomfortable, and it was not him. Vivian had spent her career learning to read a room in silence, to catch the things people didn't say aloud, and she read this one instantly. There were 3 other guests checking in around her, 2 of them white, one of them balding and irritable and dressed far more casually than she was, and none of them were being asked to prove they belonged. She felt the old familiar heat rise in her chest, the one she'd trained herself for decades to keep below the surface in courtrooms, in faculty meetings, in rooms where she was so often the only one who looked like her. She could have raised her voice. She could have demanded a manager above the manager. Instead she did something that surprised even her. She simply asked Holloway to please cancel the reservation, thanked him with a courtesy she did not feel, and walked back out through the revolving doors into the cool evening air, her bag still in her hand, her dignity intact but bruised in a place no bandage could reach. She sat in the back of a cab 20 minutes later, watching the hotel's golden lights shrink in the rear windshield, and let herself feel it, just for a moment, the old wound reopening beneath the professional armor. She thought of her mother, who had scrubbed floors in buildings she was never allowed to enter through the front door, who had told a young Vivian that the law was the only shield strong enough to hold against a world like this, and that was why Vivian had chosen it, had bled for it, had clawed her way onto the bench so that one day a room full of people would have to call her Your Honor whether they wanted to or not. And yet here she was, still small enough in a stranger's eyes to be waved away from a hotel lobby like an unwelcome smell. Her phone buzzed against her palm just as the cab merged onto the highway. It was her clerk, a sharp, tireless young woman named Odalise Ferreira, calling about a case that had landed on Vivian's desk 2 days earlier, a discrimination lawsuit filed against a hospitality group, a chain of properties accused of systematically denying rooms and services to black guests while quietly upgrading white guests to identical accommodations. Odalise was calling to confirm the defendant's full legal name for the morning filing. Vivian asked her, almost absently, which properties were named in the suit. Odalise read down the list in her business-like voice, and there, third from the top, was the Kensington Grand Hotel and Resorts Group. For a moment Vivian said nothing at all, the cab humming beneath her, the city lights sliding past the window like something out of a dream she hadn't asked to have. She had been assigned this case at random, the way cases always were, pulled by a computer with no memory of hotel lobbies or golden light or a manager named Holloway who couldn't meet her eyes. And now, an hour after living the very thing the lawsuit described in cold legal language, she held in her hands the power to decide whether that hotel group would answer for it in a court of law. She felt something settle inside her chest that was not quite anger and not quite relief, something closer to purpose, the strange and terrible clarity of watching your own life become evidence. She could have recused herself. Every instinct her legal training had built into her whispered that this was the clean path, the safe path, the one no appellate court could ever second-guess. A judge who had just been personally denied service by the defendant had no business hearing that defendant's case, not even for a moment, not even if her ruling would be perfectly fair. And so the next morning, before the symposium even began, she sat at the small desk in the modest hotel she'd found instead, and she drafted the recusal herself, clean and precise, the way she drafted everything. But she paused before signing it, staring at the blinking cursor, and found herself thinking not about procedure but about her mother's hands, cracked and raw from decades of cleaning floors she was never permitted to sleep on. She thought about how many nights that woman had told her that the system would never fix itself, that it needed people inside it who remembered what it felt like to be outside. Recusing herself was correct. It was also, in some small and aching way, another door closing quietly in her face. She did not tear up the recusal. She filed it exactly as the law required, because the law was the only thing she had ever trusted to outlast her own feelings, and a judge who bent the rules even for a righteous reason was no better than the rules being bent against her the night before. But she did something else first. She picked up the phone and called the state's Judicial Oversight Office, and she told them plainly what had happened to her at the Kensington Grand, not as Judge Ashworth seeking leverage, but as Vivian, a private citizen who believed the incident belonged in the official record of complaints against that hotel group, filed through the same channel any guest could use. She would not let her own case be tainted, but she would not let her own voice go silent either. Within days, her account joined a growing file of similar stories, another thread in a pattern too large now for anyone to keep dismissing as isolated misunderstandings. The case was reassigned to a colleague of hers, Judge Marcus Devereux, a soft-spoken man who had spent the better part of 2 decades on employment and civil rights cases and who read Vivian's public complaint alongside dozens of others before the trial even began. Months later, sitting in the gallery of his courtroom as a private citizen rather than a judge, Vivian watched as the evidence unfolded, watched Holloway himself called to the stand, sweating under questions about check-in logs and room availability records that told a story far uglier than any single lobby encounter ever could. She watched the hotel group's own internal emails read aloud, casual and cruel in a way that made even the courtroom stenographer's hands pause. And she watched, finally, as Judge Devereux delivered a ruling that did not simply award damages but ordered sweeping changes to how the entire hotel chain trained its staff, tracked its bookings, and disciplined the people who made guests feel small in the very lobbies built to welcome them. Vivian did not need the verdict to feel vindicated. She had learned long ago that the law moves slowly and imperfectly and that no single ruling erases what it feels like to stand under golden light and be told, without words, that you do not belong. But she felt something loosen in her chest as she watched Holloway leave that courtroom through a side door instead of the front, avoiding the cameras that would print his face beside the words the ruling had used. She thought of her mother again, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself cry, not from anger, but from something gentler, the quiet ache of watching a wound you carried alone become, finally, something the world was forced to see. If this story moved something in you, if you believe that dignity should never depend on the color of someone's skin or the size of their bank account, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment below, because your voice adds to a story that is still being written every single day in lobbies and courtrooms across this world. And before you go, I want to ask you something small but meaningful. Type the word "seen" in the comments if you have ever felt invisible in a room and found your way back to being seen. Vivian Ashworth never got an apology from that hotel manager, and she never expected one, but she got something rarer, the chance to turn her worst evening into someone else's better tomorrow. And if there is one thing her story asks of us, it is simply this, that we keep choosing to build doors instead of walls, even when the world has shown us only the latter, because kindness, once set into motion, has a way of outliving every person cruel enough to try and stop it.